call the meeting to order. Can't see anything anymore. 4:58. Are there any modifications or additions to the agenda?
None from staff.
Staff. And do we have anyone signed up for public comment? And I didn't see any in the packet. Yeah. Okay. Consent agenda. If there's not any questions, can I get a motion to approve the consent agenda?
So moved.
Can I get a second?
Second.
Any discussion? If not. All eyes?
Aye.
Aye, okay. If there's not any questions about the informational reports, does anyone have, any commissioners have any questions about the informational reports, or can we move on to the presentation and discussion items? Okay,
I had something for Daryl. Is Daryl presenting?
what's that?
Is Daryl presenting?
Daryl's gonna present under, oh, no, she did the waterfront recreational annual report. Did you have a question for her about that?
I saw that the sheriff's office couldn't get gas a lot of times. Was that in your report? Is there any way it could be self-serve so they have access to it?
Shell won't let that happen, will they?
Right, this year was better, so this was the 2022, so my apologies
Right.
for the delay. Better late than never. But this summer was greatly improved. Last year, they had such a hard time over their staffing that they didn't have anyone to send over to do the filling, but we did look into self-serve and it's a no-go. But they have solved most of their staffing problems, and so this summer went way better. Thank you.
I tried to get gas the other day and I called over there and they said they didn't have stock.
Nuts.
But I'm glad it went better.
Yeah,
Derek makes reservations ahead and with the manager of when to fuel, so he makes sure all of, it's like a set schedule. That he does that, so that seemed to work for him.
yeah, we usually give them like an hour. So.
Or they're
Any other questions for informational reports? If not, let's move on to market analysis report for the Lower Mill. Mr. Greg Hackberry.
Good evening, commissioners. As part of the Lower Mill market analysis and feasibility study, as you may recall, we contract Eco Northwest to produce the document. This evening we have, and I see Catherine Buck is with us. We possibly might have Chris Blackney, two of the associates representatives that we've been working with at length. And so the purpose of the presentation is to run through basically the analysis, the way that it was developed, and also have some loose recommendations and get some feedback from the commission on how, before it goes final and it gets buttoned up, how the commission might like to see it refined, or if there's any feedback. So with that, I'll hand it over to Ms. Catherine.
Hi, all. I would like to give Chris just a minute to join because he is joining today and I want to make sure he's around for questions. So let me just send him a quick note if that's all right. If not, I'll go ahead and get us started.
And while Chris is coming in, I'll just go ahead and note that this project was first identified in last year's fall planning. So this is one of the deliverables from that fall planning exercise and followed up in the spring planning. So.
Okay, I'm going to go ahead and I'll share my screen with with our presentation about the report. My name is Catherine Buck and I'm a senior project manager with Eco Northwest. And I've been working on this project with Greg and Kevin, looking at the feasibility analysis for these sites.
I'll introduce myself real quick while Catherine's bringing up the presentation deck. I'm Chris Clayton, I'm a project director with Eco Northwest. I'm also been working with Kevin and Greg and Catherine and our team on this project. So thanks for having us here today.
Okay. I'm trying to.
Would she share the screen?
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I was just trying to make the presentation as large as possible without taking over both screens so I could see everybody. Okay, how does that work?
Fine.
Great.
Excellent. So Catherine, if you wouldn't mind driving, I'll lead us off. We go to the next slide and I'll just kind of introduce the project and what we've been working on here. Oh, sorry, jumping around a little bit. Oh,
Yeah, I apologize. I'm trying to find an easier way to without it being in.
there you
Okay.
go. That'll work. So just for some project context, I'm sure you're all familiar with this project and this site, but the reason we're doing this in the first place is you're obviously losing your toll revenues with the association of the bridge replacement and looking through other avenues to generate income and operating revenue for the port. And so this is a project that was funded through Business Oregon's Port Planning and Marketing Fund to explore opportunities for the Lower Mill site, which you've been working on for some time. The Lower Mill, roughly around 11 acres, broken up by these 4 kind of core tax lots. That I know you've been doing some improvements and remediation and some things on some site prep work on to get this ready for development. So just a quick overview of our project. Really has 4 main components, 3 main components, and then a final report. So we led off this project by doing a kind of a moderate level market analysis and highest best use analysis. So we went and took a look at local supply and demand conditions, market conditions, vacancy rates, achievable rents. We did some interviews with stakeholders, with brokers and developers in the area to get a sense of what the highest and best use for this development might be in terms of type, scale, and absorption potential. We then distilled those down into a financial feasibility analysis. And so we engaged McKinsey Engineering based in Portland to take the feedback that we got and the recommendations that we made in the market analysis to develop some conceptual layouts. Massing is probably not the right word here, but some layouts to determine a kind of a prototypical feasibility or a prototypical development program for this site. And then we developed some site specific pro formas, which are a financial modeling tool to calculate what we consider to be the residual land value of these candidate development forms. And then we did an assessment of some various deal structures, looking at the kind of lease versus sale trade-offs and some phasing strategies to determine kind of the optimal path forward for y'all. And ultimately, based on the feedback of the commission tonight and from staff, we'll distill this all down into a final report for you as a next step. So just a few key findings from the market analysis portion. And again, this was informed from both data analysis and interviews with developers, brokers, and most productively with the state's industrial site recruiter at Business Oregon. So one first key finding is location. Shouldn't be surprising to anybody out here. Is somewhat prohibitive for some users that require greater access to transportation networks, greater access to markets. It's a little bit out there, not totally out there, but a little bit out there. But more on the positive side, there's really nothing in the Mid-Columbia region in terms of industrial space. There's about 40,000 square feet available in the entire market, very limited development. So consider yourself a small firm looking for 5,000 to 7,000 square feet of space. Maybe you're starting up a company. There's nothing for you in this market. And so that's positive for somebody looking to do some development. On the downside, industrial lease rates are generally low. Top of the market lease rates average close to $11 a foot across the market, stretch up to 12 or 13 for the best and brightest space. Based on our analysis, we think achievable rates at Lower Mill will be closer in the kind of $8 to $9 per square foot range, given the locational discount that you'd probably take for this area. And at these lease rates, the development form that you're likely to see out here is not, these lease rates are not likely to justify concrete tilt-up construction. So any development that occurs out here is going to be like a steel frame building, which is somewhat limiting in terms of scale, but it's less costly to develop. So. Again, this is something that came from our interviews. One of the main barriers for industrial development out here is these low achievable rents and high construction costs are not likely to attract industrial development from institutional developers. So it's going to be really challenging to get a speculative developer to invest capital, especially in today's market, to invest in an area like this, at least in the intermediate term. But again, on the flip side, we did hear in that kind of niche market of 25 to 5,000 square foot tenants up to 7,500 square foot tenants. There is it's kind of like the hot spot of the market. According to Business Oregon, they could lease that space all day. So this is kind of where we think that there's the best market opportunity. Potential users of this space would really be focused in the industries that are showing potential in this area. This is kind of sports, recreation, leisure, wind sports, agriculture and food, which is obviously really strong out here. And then the kind of emerging wine and spirits sector. And then in terms of deal structure, and this is one of the key findings that came out of our analysis, is that the port should really consider the viability of doing your own development. And there's precedent examples of this. Port of Cascade Locks is doing it. Port of Camas Washougal is doing it. To start off with doing some market making. So if you can find a way to do your own building, tap this demand that we're seeing in this market, prove that there's a market there, your likelihood of attracting institutional capital down the road may be a greater opportunity in kind of phase 2 or 3.
Excuse me. Hey, Chris, can you turn off the closed captioning? Is the closed captioning helping anyone?
I believe that's going to be on your end, so I can't.
Oh, okay, there we go. Never
I
mind.
think I just turned it off.
Oh, you did, okay.
Apologies.
It was just a tad distracting.
It was for me too.
I couldn't tell if you all could see it on your end or if it was just on the slide presenter view. So.
Okay.
And these are just a couple of examples I referenced. Port of Camas Washougal. This is their second phase of doing this. Their first phase leased completely before it was even completed. Their second phase is already 50% completed, or at least before it's completed. And then Port of Cascade Locks, Herman Creek. This building has its own story to it. There's a potential lead. I can talk about it if you like. These are kind of two precedent examples of ports taking on the initiative of doing this development in the way that we think has potential for this site.
And excuse me for interrupting. Those are both steel frame buildings there.
Yes, yes.
Thank you.
And another question about the Camas property, what size units are those?
Yeah, so this is, so if I was going to point to an example that you should copy and rinse repeat, it's the Camas Washougal example. They have, so the real recommendation here is 10 to 15-ish, whatever optimizes your site efficiency, 1,000 square foot with 2,500 square foot demising. This is where you have flexible demising walls. You could carve off a 2,500 square foot space from somebody, get rid of that demising wall, do a 5,000 square foot space from somebody, get rid of them, do 10,000 for somebody. So, but break it up in those chunks with the flexibility to accommodate the broadest range of tenants as possible, because that's going to optimize your absorption in a market like this. Next slide, I think, Catherine. And so ultimately what we did is we took these recommendations and we engaged with, again, I mentioned McKinsey Engineering out of Portland, really top-notch firm in the industrial development market in the region, to translate those findings into a development program. And this is what they came up with. A couple of things that factored into this. First, again, the input of the market analysis to try to target that, smaller scale building range. The buildings end up being in some of these parcels a little bit bigger, but that is largely just driven by site efficiency. it doesn't make sense to do a small building on a tax lot if you could do a bigger building on a tax lot from a financial feasibility perspective. There's this curb cut along Highway 35 to the south that was very important to preserve. Anybody that's ever done work with ODOT before knows that you want to make sure you keep that because if it goes away, you're never getting it back. And then we also prioritize parcelization. So it was really important for us to have buildings that didn't require aggregation of lots or didn't have a building that straddled a lot line. To allow for flexibility in the port's kind of phasing and decision-making about how to dispose of or develop on these properties. And then finally, we explored some opportunities to leverage this otherwise really inefficient piece down here. I don't know if you can see my cursor, or Catherine's cursor, but the dogleg portion down there to the south, where it's really just there's not much productive you can do there. So we looked at some opportunities. And if you go to the next slide, Catherine, to explore some storage unit type of space, which is very low cost, doesn't require utilities, really meaningful utilities, to try to get some efficient use out of that piece that really doesn't have an alternative use. And so then we took that and we did a financial feasibility analysis based on the development program, which I'm going to let my colleague Catherine dig into the work that she did.
Yes. So we looked for determining the financial feasibility. We used a residual land value model. So as part of this model, we are looking at, this tells us the maximum price that a developer could pay for land under the assumed parameters, taking into account all of the costs and the returns that they need on the project. What is the most that they could pay for that land? And if the residual land value is equal to or above land prices in the market, then development is considered feasible. But since the port owns the land, the development is likely feasible as long as the residual land value of the project is 0 or above. But if the residual land value is less than 0, then development is likely infeasible, given the current market conditions. So we also are going looked at the return on cost for the different buildings and tax lot developments. And the return on cost is a forward-looking metric that calculates the return on the investment once the project achieves stabilized income. So we would take the total project costs and we divide it by the net operating income to get to the return on cost. So for these projects, when we look at the port developing these buildings, we used assumed a return on cost threshold of 3.5%. And while this is generally considered a low threshold for the market and typically not something that the private or institutional developers would accept, we were looking to see if the port may be able to accept the lower returns in order to satisfy other goals of job creation and economic development. So just flagging that was the return on cost assumption we initially used. And here are the assumptions that we used for our pro forma model. And we took the building cost, construction cost numbers. We looked based on our market analysis, and then we vetted and confirmed that with McKinsey Engineering. And then the income for the projects or for the buildings we used from our market analysis. And a residual land value calculations by parcel and by building, we see that parcel 1015, this building A, is the most feasible project because it does have the highest residual land value of any of the buildings or any of the tax lots. We see that this site 902 has the lowest residual land value of any of the tax lots.
Let me interrupt there. Why is that?
Let me just click to the next slide. So what we're seeing is that the residual land value does vary by the lot coverage by building on the site. So 1015 utilizes more of the site, while 902 does have a lot of open space. So efficiency of lot coverage impacts the feasibility of the projects because all else is equal. We are assuming that these are the same product being built on the different tax lots and the same materials, and you'll receive the same income off those properties. So the variability comes from the size and lot coverage.
But by your own data, using all of, say, lot 902 for self-storage could make that more productive.
Well, we didn't do a detailed market analysis of self-storage. I would say that 4.8 acres of self-storage would not be, that'd be overkill for a market of this size, certainly.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
So, and here we looked at how building coverage on the lot compared to the residual land value. And we do see the sites that utilize more of the lot coverage with a larger building are a bit more feasible.
So one important, if you can back up real quick, Catherine, one important distinction here is that we prioritized parcelization here. So it is completely likely, or not likely, feasible that your overall, if you took the overall site and just aggregate it and just consider it as being one site, that you would see the aggregate value might be marginally higher because you could get to different layouts on this site if you were not considering the parcelization of the site, right? But we wanted to prioritize flexibility so that the port could be like, well, we want to develop this one, but we want to just dispose of this one, right? And so that's why you see this variability where some buildings might not be like the most efficient thing that you could do in the site overall, but within each individual parcel, you're going to see a broader variance in site efficiency than you might otherwise have.
Question, and you might not have done the study on it, but besides just general self-storage, do you guys have any barometer of seasonal self-storage, like boats, RVs, things of that nature that seem to be pretty prevalent in this region?
Yeah, the extent of the work that we did on self-storage was to do a very light touch market analysis to get a sense of what storage units are leasing for in this market. And then McKinsey took a look at this dogleg portion here to see if it was physically feasible from a just forget about market, physically feasible to get some amount of self-storage on that site. And that was ended up being affirmative. And so then we fed that into our pro forma model to show as a contributor to lot 902 what the marginal impact on residual land value of getting some efficient use or some productive use out of that otherwise useless dogleg portion would be.
Okay.
Do we know the status of there's a self-storage less than a half a mile away from this location to the south, just around the hill there. Do we know whether they're fully booked out? Do they still have space? That would definitely be the first set of competition to this if we did something with storage. The impression that I get just driving by it, I think they have space, but I don't know that to be true.
If I may, this whole project was from Business Oregon under light industrial complex grants to look at job creation. So we really struggled with how much we expected Eco Northwest to dig into a commercial type function like self-storage. And so we wanted to maintain, because Business Oregon is still going to give us the money, the product that's going to be produced is in conformance with that light industrial job creation approach.
So we do want to get into some of the considerations that we had and how they would impact feasibility of development. So one of the considerations was by staggering development, the projects do become a bit more feasible or financially feasible by about $1. So if we hold off about 2 years, and with inflation on income and construction costs, we do see that there is a benefit. So this could impact and phasing plans for site development. Another consideration there is the developer fee. In our base model, we use a 5% development fee, which is in line with what an institutional developer would look at. But because the port owns the land, there are some options about how the sites could be developed. Either the port could partner with a developer. They could hire their own port full-time employee to manage the project or devote existing resources to the project. So we also look to see if we lowered the developer fee, how that would impact financial feasibility. So we ran the numbers again with a 0.5% developer fee, which equals about $217,000 spent on the development, the developer fee. And that does increase the residual land value of the parcels by over $2. And then we did look at the return on cost by building to see what the output of these sites were. So we do see that 1015, this building A, does have the highest return on cost. So it does seem to be the most financially feasible site for development. And then we see the self-storage one has a 2.98% return on cost. And then also keeping the development in-house or modifying building sizes or staggering the development could all result in a greater return on cost for the project. So just some of the takeaways from conducting the financial feasibility analysis, we see that this tax lot 1015 is the most financially viable option to develop. And this tax lot 902 is the least financially viable to develop. The financial feasibility is correlated to the building coverage of the lot. And then there's options to increase the financial feasibility of these projects by, weighting or staggering development, looking at how we structure that developer fee, and that would increase financial feasibility.
And just one quick note on the 902. 902 is showing that it's the lowest financially viable option, again, because of site efficiency, because you're basically taking the total value of development of building E, F, G, and H, and then dividing it by total land area. And the reason it's lowest is because it has the most inefficient layout. So if you have like the very east or western portion of the dogleg, that's just wasted land, right? You have the big laydown or turning radius section between the three buildings, because you have 3 buildings oriented here. That's inefficient space. I would say that down the line, so if this was maybe after you have established a market, or if a market for this area materializes, this may actually be the most appealing property to an external investor, because it has the frontage, right? So under our baseline assumptions of a prototype that's similar to all the rest of the buildings, yeah, sure, at least financially viable because of inefficiency. But if the development program looked different, it very much could be the premium site, because you might be able to capitalize on a premium in lease rates for that frontage that are above and beyond what we're assuming is a baseline for the entire program. So just a nuance about kind of the differences in market dynamics over time. So if this was an area that had become established, this site in particular may command a price premium over some of the other buildings due to its frontage. Sorry to derail that, Catherine. But okay, so I'm up on deal structure. In addition to taking a look at the development program from the perspective of the port, which as a developer, which is everything that Catherine just showed, we took a look at what the residual land values would be from the perspective of an institutional developer. And what this means is we're effectively setting the return threshold at a higher rate. So we set it at a 6% return on cost to see how much this land would be worth under this development program to the institutional market. And the answer is not just 0, but it's negative. And so that is to say that at these rates of return and these cost levels and these assumptions about future income, no institutional developer would be attracted to this site under those conditions. And that reinforces what we heard in the interviews with both brokers and developers in the state. So this is one of the findings that really led us to say, Port, this is something you should consider as doing on your own. And so yes, like I said, all else equal, increasing the return on cost to 6% causes all the residual land values to go from somewhat positive and variable to negative across the board. And so just again, some key findings, and some of this is stuff we've already discussed. As I just mentioned, these conditions will make it difficult to attract some developer and institutional developer capital. We want to make sure that we're elevating the economic development and market making impacts of the port doing its own development. As a port authority, you do in a way have a mission statement around economic development. And so what we've put forward does have some ancillary economic development impacts of providing space for incubating firms that both can create downstream value for your project, but also a benefit for your community at large. As we discussed, 1015 is the star due to efficiency, has the highest residual land value. When we take a look at the trade-offs between lease and sale, ground leases, they're becoming increasingly common, but in a market like this, it's usually when there's a barrier to cost of land, and that's really not the case here. So we think that at least for this development program, the optimal structure for the port would be a sale over a lease. That's not to say that you might end up in a situation where a portion of the site you may consider a shorter term lease agreement for a user that might have a lower intensity use, like a laydown yard or something like that, where they're not putting improvements. Something that's like a 5 or 10 or whatever year lease structure. That might be a good interim use until we get to the period where the market is there. That makes feasibility more likely, but in an apples to apples comparison, the sale rate route is the best to go. Next slide, please. And so one of the reasons why, I guess one of the big takeaways is that if you do this on your own, if you're willing to accept a lower rate of return in the market as a port authority, you make it more feasible than the private market can. And one of the reasons for that, in addition to being able to accept a lower rate of return, is access to cheaper capital. And so I won't go through these in detail unless you want me to, but we interviewed Business Oregon's Industrial Lands Specialist Group and Incentives Group, and they identified these kind of 4 programs as opportunities for a project like this to tap for resources for site improvement, for construction, for streetscape improvements. And so you effectively could do some things with other people's money that a private developer wouldn't necessarily have access to. And so key recommendations and takeaways. If the port would like to see industrial space and support business growth in these parcels, consider doing some vertical development on your own. If you're able to get the market off the ground. Phasing strategy, 1015 is the low-hanging fruit for a couple of reasons. 1, because it's the most valuable, and 2, it's not reliant on another property's development or an easement from another property for access. So it's the easiest to develop and it's the most valuable. And then the sale versus ground lease, I've already discussed. So. And then just to wrap up, here we are today on the 19th, presenting to you folks. Staff has already received a draft of our financial feasibility report. They're looking to get that back to us this week. And then we're gonna have based on feedback from you folks tonight and from staff, we're looking to turn around something in the next week or so and have you a kind of buttoned up deliverable that summarizes all of our key findings that that meets the obligation of task 4 in our scope of work.
Could you go back to the map that showed the various plots? I have a couple of questions for you. Yeah. Yeah, right there is fine. So 1015, as you said, is probably the most profitable rate of return of the total 4 lots there. Am I correct in saying that development of that size building would be somewhere in the neighborhood of 4.2 million?
The cost of construction.
Yeah, we provide the land, but putting a building on there with the hard surfaces and stuff is about 4.2 million. If we wanted to develop that property ourselves, are we talking about that much money?
Catherine, you might be able to bring up our pro forma and give the hard
Yeah.
and soft cost numbers.
Yep.
Yeah.
I'm just going through between the screens. Right, so for 1015 total cost, we were at 3.8 million, about $176 per square foot.
Well, I added in
Total.
your 20% and your 10% contingency. And I even added in the developer fee, even though we may be our own developer. But that pushes it up over 4.
Yeah, you're in the ballpark. It's in the ballpark of 3.8 to 4.2-ish.
And if we did that first, what kind of programs do you think we could go after? You cited some there to help upfront fund this thing.
Yeah, so there's smaller programs where you could get 100 grand here and 100 grand there for street front improvements. But the biggest program, according to Business Oregon, again, we interviewed them as part of this project to get their sense of what this project would be most competitive for. There's 2, in normal conditions, it would be the Port Revolving Loan Fund. That's a port specific capital improvement fund. It's not well capitalized right now at the state level. So the indication from Business Oregon was that even though that would normally, from a criteria perspective, be the most appropriate, there's no money there. So not the best route. So their indication was that the Special Public Works Fund would be most appropriate.
And what would we likely be able to do there?
It's going to vary by project. We have a deeper dive write-up, but that's not really something I can answer. I mean, we can talk about general criteria and there's some narrative that we have here about the amount you can get per job and things that you're creating and things like that. But ultimately, I would be uncomfortable making a recommendation about like the amount of money that you could get out of that program. That really would be something you should have a deeper dive conversation on a project specific basis with.
I promise you, we won't write it down. Ballpark, are we talking, $5,000? Are we talking potentially, $1 million, $500,000, $250,000? What are we talking about?
So it's going to depend largely on the job creation and job efficiency of the actual project. So for example, like if the jobs that are created on there if it's 2 jobs in a 20,000 square foot building, it's a data center or something, it's not much. But if it's a higher intensive use, the money can be higher. And so I like at this conceptual level, it would be difficult for me to throw a number at you, but I'm happy to follow up with the industrial land specialist and get a more accurate sense for you.
So what I was kind of playing with here, if you go back to the map for a second. if we did a phased in kind of a development, and I agree, a land lease is probably not the best way to go. And certainly not gonna make us a whole bunch of money. I was thinking maybe the port developed 1015. And then before everybody says no, just hear me out. On 902. Take a hard look, and we may have to have a zone change. But there is a big project coming that's gonna have to have homes for somewhere in the neighborhood of 150 people. And for a period equivalent of about 4 to 6 years. Most of these people are gonna be coming in, working Monday through Friday. And going home on the weekend, and vast majority of them are gonna be living out of their own RV trailers. So does it make sense to set up 902 as a nice RV park for these temporary workers for a period of 6 years and help use that money that we generate off of that to pay for the development of 1015? There is a critical shortage of where we're gonna house these 150 people. It is a real problem for the community, both in Oregon and Washington. And this seems like it's right down the road from the new bridge. This seems like a nice little spot to park some of them. And it helps the local community, the local grocery store right around the corner from here. So, but that may be a way that with a little bit of investment, we could start generating some revenue that could be used to generate development of 1015. And then we springboard off of that. So I'm thinking we could, if I don't have the number in front of me anymore, but believe it or not, an RV park like that could produce quite a bit of revenue. If we're talking normally $40 a night, and that's cheap. And if we could squeeze 70 or 80 people in there, that's a pretty healthy cash flow with very minor investment. And they're paying for it 7 days a week, not just 5.
Debbie, you were wanting to.
Well, I
Comment?
just wanted to comment when we were talking about the Special Public Works Fund. I've actually dealt with them quite a bit. And they have a lot of different programs. So there's the potential that we could apply for more than one type of program. They flow federal funds through there, but they also fund some of their projects with lottery dollars. And they have both loans and grants. And sometimes, a lot of times they'll do a loan that's structured as part of it is forgivable, depending again, if you're generating jobs and things like that. And that part of it would be forgivable. And so they do multi-million-dollar projects. So it is a good place to start if we're trying to finance that. I definitely talk to them.
I'm
first.
just looking at 2 problems. Problem 1 is start development of the area.
Right.
Problem 2 is where are we gonna house 150 people?
Right.
And I would think some of these grants, you could use that as a benefit to the community.
Yes, there is that potential, yes. So,
Something to think about.
yeah, and I don't know what it would take to develop an RV park. We'd probably be looking, I don't know what like the sewer system in that area is like and the water, the water supply when you're talking about that many people. So there's a lot of things to look at for that. But they're certainly doable to research it.
I've been involved with 2 RV parks out on the coast, so have some experience in the planning and development of those as well.
Well, the Cascade Locks RV Park is incredibly successful. They're expanding it even, so, I mean, there is a need here for sure.
I think that.
Trust me, my parking lot knows. They all park there.
But I would think you put in a nice park. You can put a cheap one in, but it's gonna be an eyesore. But if you put a nice one in, put some rules into it,
Mm.
it could be a benefit to the community.
So
And there's RVs right down that road.
Mhm.
So within a quarter of a mile, there's other RVs that are already sitting there and they're nice.
That'd just be a conversation we would need to have with the county.
I think you'd need to wave the flag of 150 new people needing a place to live to get the
Mhm.
zone change pushed through because. And it would have to be a temporary thing, so as nice as you make it, you're gonna have to revert. I'm assuming because of the county, the way they look at their percentages of land zone uses. They're not gonna wanna give up 4.5 acres of light industrial land for a commercial or a residential function, if you will, permanently.
But if you
Without
talk to
exchange.
them about, hey, this is for the bridge for the community.
You know, I think that is
and
that's
We gotta
the,
park them someplace.
that's the way to get them to really consider it, at least as a temporary.
And for the
use.
port, that could be a really nice little revenue stream for a number of years. Because upkeep on an RV park is not that bad once you get it in and if you do it right. It's probably more profitable than storage sheds.
I agree, I think it's a good idea, one word pursuing.
So if we could, I wanna, I guess, make best use of our presenters. So if we can go back to the this plan that they've presented. I'm just gonna summarize it and you guys can maybe help me make sense of this. It looks like what makes the most sense if we're gonna develop it is for the port to do it. If we just wanted to do that 10-15 lot, it looks like it's around $4 million. And I'm looking through the funding options that you presented, which I love that they're all laid out here, but the SB4 industrial is for advanced manufacturing. So let's just assume that's not going to be viable. The immediate opportunity fund is for projects that have roadway construction. So if that's not involved, then that's out. And there's no money in the port revolving fund. That leaves us just with the special public works. Which if I'm reading this right, is saying $5,000 for each job created, even if the building creates, I don't know, 20 jobs. That's a drop in the bucket compared to $4 million. So I guess the struggle is real here. We don't have a lot of money and we're trying to figure out how to make money. And we want to create jobs and we want to support this kind of industrial development. The struggle is figuring out how to connect the dots here to get us to being able to fund something like this. So do you have any wisdom to share?
Well, the one thing I would say is the preceding discussion about coming up with a productive use for other sites to fund or create a dedicated revenue stream to fund the thing you want to be doing.
Yeah.
Is the right path. Whether or not it's an RV park is the right thing, or leasing to somebody for a laydown yard is another thing that shows up in our strategy recommendations. Is what can you, or it could be a disposition of some land at a below market rate, right? So we have this piece that we're willing to sell for $1 million to capitalize the thing we want to do, and we'll make a market and make it up on the back end of something. One of the other pieces of our the site that you're retaining. So I guess I've just slid down to the strategy of coming up with a portion of this property that you could derive either lease or sale revenue on to in part fund the development that you want to do, of which we're showing or recommending has a market for, is an inherent part of our strategy recommendation.
Okay, and I'm super appreciative of this whole presentation. I don't mean to be dumping our financial woes into your lap. I mean, you guys have done a great job of laying out what's possible here and what's involved. And it's really cool. I mean, I would love to see us do something there. We have to think about how. So,
And just if we had 80 sites. And each site's $40 a night. 5 years, that's $5.2 million alone. That's just pure revenue. I'm wondering if we wanted to go that way, that $5 million is a revenue cash flow that we could use to, work off the loan of the 4 million. But the other thing I'm wondering is there some money back in DC associated with temporary housing for workers that maybe we could get some of that to do the initial build, which means that $5 million could go pretty much essentially to the new building. I think there's something there that we ought to be looking at.
Christie, can I ask a question?
Of course.
Hey, Chris, this is Kevin. Hey, I just wanted to, I know there was a number of 4%. So that the rate or the return on construction was right around 4%. That was the goal.
We set it at 3.5%, right, Catherine? Is this right return for the port? Yeah.
Yes.
So if the construction, so tell me if this makes sense or if this is off. But if the construction value is $4 million and you apply that 4%, that's $160,000 a year. Is that what we should be generating off of that asset annually? Or am I misunderstanding 4%?
Catherine, you might help me out here. I'm not understanding the question. Maybe you.
So in looking at for parcel 1015, when we look at
Right.
we used the 960 a year or for the rental rate per square foot. So we get to an income off that building A as $211,000. But that's before, that's just gross income off the building.
Right, yeah, right. Okay, so I'm not too far off, based on the.
But I think you gotta add in operating costs that we have to pay for as well.
Absolutely.
Mhm. So when we take out those costs, we have $190,000 a year as the net income for the building.
Does anybody else have any other questions? Comments? Any further?
Good fall planning discussion.
Probably so. I think that should probably be a priority on our fall planning, because it's pretty much shovel ready at this point, yes?
Yeah, but 902, we'll talk about that.
Okay.
It will be shovel ready.
Okay.
I would just like to reiterate that this is a snapshot for light industrial. We wanted to look at what the market would provide. And so they built a model based upon those presumptions. And it gives us just some information to make decisions. We're not beholden to
Right.
this site plan or this strategy by any form, but we can parcel it out. We can pursue other strategic ways of monetizing, but this was really just to give us a baseline of, all right, from the light industrial lens, what are we looking at? Do we need to make other decisions? Are we stuck with a certain pathway or not? And so this is good information for us to take in our fall planning for some good in-depth discussions on how staff can move forward and look at other ways to monetize these lots.
And if I remember correctly, at previous plannings, we had discussed the possibility of selling one of the parcels. So I guess one of the questions that I have is, if we were to sell a parcel, which is the one that would be recommended to consider?
So I can't give you an answer for that on this one's worth more than another one, because the findings of our analysis is to to somebody that is developing, say, take lot, oh, sorry, Catherine, if you can go back to the.
Nah.
Take lot 1101, for instance. The finding of our analysis is no institutional developer would find any value in developing 1101 as a light industrial building. Right? So you cannot develop light industrial on 1101. So then you go to, well, what is a use that could pay something for this, right? It could be a lower intensity use, it could be a laydown yard, it could be an RV park, it could be something else that's not this. Could find some positive residual land value. And so then when you're making your decisions, I would just recommend making your decisions in the context of the economic development trade-offs, the fiscal impact trade-offs, and the impact on ancillary uses trade-offs. Because ultimately, one of the things we're trying to do here is prove that there is a market out here so that in phase 2 or 3, after you build 10, 15, then you're showing to the institutional market, oh, by the way, this is a productive use. You can make money out here. We do have users. You can get $11 a foot now. And ultimately that changes the market dynamics over time. I don't know if I answered your question, but I tried to.
No, it's good. Thank you.
Yeah. I mean, you've had inquiries for ground leases or purchase for really, really low intensive uses, from what I understand. So it's basically a trade-off decision of, do we sell it for 60 cents a foot now or $10 a foot later? You know, like those, I'm just throwing out random numbers, but yeah.
Hey, Greg, 1017, is there a temporary batch plant sitting on that now?
That's correct. Who would like to purchase if offered the opportunity? I would just make sure, Chris and Catherine, do you guys feel that you've gotten enough feedback and direction from the commission to finalize the product and move forward with buttoning it up? Are you still needing any more?
I think the one piece of feedback that I heard the most would be to get some clarity around and maybe some additional detail around the opportunities for special public works from Business Oregon. And outside of that, I feel like we have some pretty good direction. So Catherine, same? Yeah.
Great, yeah.
Commissioners, was there anything that you put out there that you feel that they didn't pick up or they needed like for them to include?
Well, I don't know if this would be for them or for us to follow up on, is to maybe start having the conversation with the county about temporary uses.
I think that's staff.
Okay.
Yeah.
What year was that Candace building built?
It's under construction.
Oh, it's still under construction. Okay. And how many square feet are they in?
At the top of my head, I think there were 20,000 square foot buildings. I can bring it up real fast, I'm sure, but
Roughly the same size as
As that one, yeah.
1015.
And that one was 100% pre-leased.
the first phase of theirs was 100% pre-lease. The second phase, which is what this rendering is of, as of the draft of this report, was 50% pre-leased. And so let's see here, I'm reading this now. It was also funded by a program in Washington State called Community Economic Revitalization Board. So it's called CURB. So they got development financing through Washington's Economic Development Group. They were 50,000 square foot multi-tenant buildings. They got $1.7 million in a loan and a $300,000 grant to build them. Demising walls down to 3,300 square foot and up to 13, so consistent with what we've recommended. Excuse me, I've misquoted myself. The building was 80% leased as of our draft, not 50%. So
Do you know what their projected return on cost?
no, we don't have access to their financial analysis. But I do know Dave Rip over there. I could call him, and see.
And then I know you said that you've been talking to Business Oregon. Have you also talked to the more local MCED here to see about other funding mechanisms that might be on their radar?
We tried. We didn't get a response from MCED in our multiple attempts to reach out to them.
Hey, Chris, on the Porta Cascade Locks building, that's what, around 40,000 square feet?
Yeah,
And does that can that be made into smaller units? Or is that come as you are, 40,000?
yeah. So the story behind this building, it was purpose built for a user that ended up not taking the building. And so then they started to go down the route of looking at subdivision of the space, but they're currently in talks for a large scale data center for this property. And so that pumped the brakes on looking for the multi-tenant piece, because they had a dedicated user willing to pay a premium for the space. So, but that's going through its own set of review challenges and approval things for that specific use, which obviously doesn't come with a lot of economic development impact.
So did I hear that right? This was built with kind of the intent of being a data center?
No, it was built with the intent of serving a user that interestingly fits very well within the model we're talking about. Was a user that was incubated out of their first phase of Hermit Creek Business Park, and needed a big building because they got some capital and they were scaling up really well and they needed a big building. And then Porta Cascade Locks said, we'll build you a building. And then COVID hit and ripped the carpet out from underneath them, and it did not end up going forward the way as planned. And the Porta Cascade Locks had this building, and then they found a data center use to basically recoup for them. So while they were looking at tenanting strategies for smaller space. So.
Thank
But
you.
this is an example, I guess I would point to this as an example that kind of whole model of what could happen here at Lower Mill, right? So if you're the port and you develop a space that incubates a firm like that, when they get to the scale where they need to go from 7,000 square feet to 15,000 square feet, you can point to 1101 and say, well, we got a spot for you. We can build you a building there. And that's generally how these port-driven programs have been most successful. Port of Kalama has been really successful deploying models like that.
I think you might also add that it highlights the gamble if you speculative development of that scale and that tenant backs out for whatever reason, and then it sits empty, unleased, rather than the small incremental model that we've used to in this product.
100%.
Okay. Well, if there's no other questions, thank you guys for your time and for all of the information, and it's much appreciated, well put together, and we appreciate you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Okay, so the next discussion item is the participation of legal counsel at board meetings. Kevin, do you want to start with that?
Well,
You
there's
need
nothing
her?
in your packet regarding this issue, so it's really just an opportunity to make sure that we're using our legal counsel in the best and most efficient use for the commission. I think we've been having a really great relationship, but we also understand that we're trying to keep our legal bills down and have them managed appropriately. I have, in my 20 years, it's all over the board as far as legal involvement in Rockaway. It was about 50% of the time. At the city of Garibaldi, every meeting. At the Port of Garibaldi, one time in 5 years. Port of Newport, maybe 2 times in 5 years, and then here every time. So we did contact SDAO. Christie was on the email just to ask for guidance, and that was pretty much the response, is that it's really up to the board to utilize legal counsel as it deems that would fit. So it's really just to see what works for the commission, but I don't know if it's a good use of time for your attorney to sit through these types of presentations, but anyway, that's kind of the root of the discussion, and I'll turn it back over to you.
Well, yeah, I think the conversation kind of came up just watching, for the last couple of years, it's been understandable why our legal fees have been pretty high. Because we've been just going through lots of staffing changes, lots of changes in things, and that needed obviously a legal review. And since onboarding Kristen, just getting her up to speed and all of that, now that I think that you're feeling a little bit more comfortable. And after going through the leases and going through some other big tackle, heavy lifting stuff, it's kind of a question of how are we feeling? I know one of the things is, staff leans very heavily on Kristen, and we appreciate her time, and we appreciate her, her rates. That they're heavily discounted. As a member of our community, as a constituent here. But it's more of a question of this board. We've just been noticing, she kind of sits silently at these meetings, and we're all here, we're getting paid a lot for these meetings. And so it was just more of a conversation of what do we all feel comfortable with? One of the ideas was to make sure she sees the agenda every week or every meeting. That would be bad. And she can raise her hand and say, I see some red flags and I think I need to be there. Or this seems like a very mellow meeting and have fun with it. Or so it was more of a conversation for you guys to, what are your comfort levels?
I've got 2 inputs. One, the less important one is just the question, what's the overhead to the port on having our council in the chair for our meetings? I mean, how much is that costing us?
Usually 1 hour, I don't know what the prep is before and after, so it could be a couple hours. I don't know if the meetings necessarily are that's not the big item, I don't think.
No.
I mean,
But I'm trying to get an idea of what does that cost?
I'm guessing $200 to $400, maybe 500.
Okay,
Correct me if I'm wrong.
It's probably not that much for
okay.
that, but
This is-
yeah.
So having her in the meeting is not costing that much. In the big scale thing.
Okay,
So where is the money going?
One, we have had quite a bit of activity as far as reviewing some of our overarching policies, like for instance, work in progress on the procurement rules. So we're going through a full review of purchasing rules, but that's getting pretty close to being done. There's been quite a bit of activity working our way through a lot of the leases that have been changed. There's now teeth, quote unquote, in the leases that hadn't been there prior. And then there's been some other contracts as they come up that Kristen has been reviewing. I think from staff's perspective, just to respond to that, is I think we're working to do what we need to from a management team to create those term sheets for those contracts, so that all of the known entities are determined from the management perspective, shared with the commission. And the last step is to go to your attorney for the final blessing. But I think in the past, there's been more of a reliance to go back and forth several times as you get to the contract development. And so that's where we would be looking to maybe cut that back out.
So the second piece of input I had, which is the more important piece, which is just asking the question. Does having our counselor sitting in a chair at our meetings provide the public an appreciably higher level of service? I don't know that it does. I kind of feel like maybe for certain meetings, we would want to say, please come to this meeting.
Mhm.
Like, we want you here at this meeting, but for a lot of other meetings, if we have a question, it's not an urgent, have to have an answer now. We could just send an email or something. So that's my thought, is that maybe it's not necessary for every meeting.
Seems like it's been more important for some of our executive sessions than. Maybe if we have an executive session that Kristen thinks she should be present for. And then I do think we could, if we have questions for legal, it could be directed to staff to investigate.
I guess I'm
Unless you-
torn on this one, because I see value of having you in these meetings. And I know the port's been working hard on getting the basic procedures, policies, and the basics back in place here and training for it and so on. And I think you bring value in that particular process to make sure that we're compliant. My sense is we're not done yet. In fact, I sense we've got a long ways to go yet. We're starting to make progress, and that's good. But we're not there yet. So I would be concerned about really throttling you back. As far as having you in this meeting, on the big scale of things, that's not where the money is.
Right.
So I would be real, and especially since we're going to once a month meeting now. I would keep you here, at least for another 6 months to a year. We take a look at it. At that time, how has everything else matured? Has what you've done on the leases really taken hold? Or are we still having problems with, certain payments and issues and so on? When we get a little bit more runtime on that, then maybe we throttle it back a bit. But my gut feel is we're not there yet. We're on the way, but we're not there yet. That's my opinion. I wouldn't make a change right now.
All right, commissioners, what are your thoughts?
Well, I think I agree with both sides of, is the perception, does the public perceive that it's better to have her here or not? I'm sure that people could argue both ways easily. I agree that we're going through a lot of stuff, and the next 2 years are going to be interesting, and and I do love you. And so it's not that, but I do think that we need to be very mindful. If we are going to have her in the meetings, I do think we need to start trying to have staff be mindful of what's the, I wouldn't say chain of command, but what's the route that we go to? And I think that in the past, it's been check with legal first, have legal do stuff, and then come back. And maybe what we need to do is change that mindset and say, we need to get our ducks in a row and then do our stuff, and then legal's last.
Well, to make an example of another governmental agency that we're just setting up right now, and we're going through the same kinds of things. But the attitude I think we're trying to take with the legal counsel is we don't ask the legal counsel, how should we do this? We ask legal counsel, here's what we want to do. Does this fit? And if it doesn't, knowing the intent, what do we have to modify to make it? So it gets you to the same place, but it's much more direct for legal instead of throwing something back and forth across the fence.
Well, it sounds to me like maybe we keep her
Yeah, I mean, I also like Commissioner Fox's recommendation to stay with 100% for now and revisit it in the future.
Okay,
Just kind of be mindful.
yeah,
It's not, the legal bills are not, for this participation what I thought they were, so that helps too.
okay,
Okay, we'll keep things as status quo, and management will just kind of monitor our processes and be a little bit more choosy.
I don't know if I agree with that, Kevin.
Okay.
I think the signal I'm trying to suggest that we give to you guys is that when you go to legal for a review, be very careful. Here's what I want to go do. And then ask her, does it meet the criteria? And if not, what do we have to modify? Instead of, hey, I got a problem, what should I do? Right. Be very specific on what you want to do and get her to okay it or modify it. Sure.
Yeah,
And doing that right there will probably cut down the legal bill quite a bit. I agree.
okay, great. Thank you for that input. That's very, very helpful.
okay. All right, Executive Director report, Mr. Greenwood.
All right, most of the report, I don't want to read the report to you, just a couple of things that have come up in the last couple of days. So speaking about plans and processes, Special Districts Association is reviewing the Port's Emergency Action Plan, which was last done almost 10 years ago. And they will be coming in as part of our insurance relationship, and we'll be working with staff and our safety committee through a rewrite. I did just complete emergency and disaster preparedness course through special districts, and we'll be taking additional courses in the future to implement that plan once it's up and running. But I think we all feel like an all hazards plan really needs to be developed, that everybody is involved with the development of, and that it's implemented and used and reviewed.
Are you thinking about drills?
Yeah, that would be part of it. And the all hazards plan is really designed to apply to the vast majority of emergencies, which primarily are things like medical emergencies, fires, things of that. I mean, things like active shooters, quite frankly, are very minor, so there wouldn't be a lot of focus on that, but more on those issues and events that are going to be the most likely to occur. Another item, and I know President Chapman has talked with the chair of the Hood River Valley Parks and Rec District, but the port has been invited to a joint workshop with the Parks District to review the results of the public survey that they just recently submitted to the public and are analyzing, and that they would want to meet with the Port Commission along with Hood River County and the city of Hood River to come up with a comprehensive strategy for funding and our parks and rec needs in the community.
And I'm not exactly sure if it is the county. I think this joint meeting on the 3rd. I'm not sure if the county and the city are gonna be at that.
I did get a text from Mark Hickok, who's the executive director, and he says that the agenda is in flux. But it sounds like maybe the October 3rd date is still a possibility.
Correct. So if any commissioner wants to attend that meeting, you're more than welcome to. I'm planning on attending it. And I also was going to try and meet with Nan Notaboom, the chair, just to kind of get a crash course on what they're looking at doing before the meeting, so I don't walk into it blind.
What date is it?
October the 3rd.
That would be the old first
first meeting.
Tuesday of the month. And I'll be attending, they've got a meeting tomorrow night of their board, so I'm gonna go and sit in and just kind of listen and monitor and we'll, I'm sure you'll provide me with more feedback as you talk to Nan.
Yes, I mean, according to Nan, they've been working with SDAO consultant to kind of try and lay a path of what they think that they should do moving forward. And it sounds to me that it would be beneficial for maybe the port to consider teaming up with them a little bit more.
Do we have a feel for what they're really trying to do?
That's what I want.
You know, I think, in my opinion, we need to figure out what the meaning
Right.
really is, and then you need to decide whether it's better for us to show up in mass to understand it. Yeah, I don't know enough.
Yeah, I don't know what I don't
I
know.
got plenty to do.
Yeah, so I have she's getting back on, I believe, the 27th from a vacation. And so I was gonna try and meet with her before that October 3rd meeting. So I'd be happy to report to Kevin and then he can report to everyone.
Well, and then if you think that we need to be there, send out an invite.
Exactly. Yeah, that's fine.
I guess the thing is, I've sat in these planning meetings of theirs over the last year. And what they're really trying to do is to replace their pool. So that's their big number one priority.
Well, we got water, but we don't have time.
Right, right.
They got a hose.
Yeah, right, exactly. And I think what they're trying to look at is. A lot of times when you're looking at potential new taxing measures, which most parks are funded through
Tax.
property taxes or sales tax. What's the added value that
So,
you're getting?
so the value that you're kind of talking about is if they go for a tax raise. Is it beneficial for us to tag along with that and do something that would help support us?
That's the potential. And what's the
If that's the
partnership?
case, then yeah, it's that makes sense.
So then I guess the other question is that if on October 3rd, they're having this meeting and more than two of our commissioners want to go, then we can just simply
We just
notice
notice
it.
it.
We'll
yeah.
just notice it. So just let me know a couple days in advance and we can get those notices out.
Well, again, you guys gotta tell us
Mhm.
whether it's worth.
So, so there's that, and then also next week, the city of Hood River and other public managers in Hood River are meeting with representatives from Springfield, Oregon, who are interested in learning how to develop their waterfront similar to Hood River. So I'll be participating in that. Representative Blumenauer staff will be in Hood River on Thursday, the 21st, 2 days away, from 12:30 to 1:30. I believe the first half hour, Commissioner Fox is going to do a quick presentation, and then the second half hour, I'll be doing a presentation on the FAA with the airport projects. We've got making great progress with the EDA grant application on Lot 1. So if there's a commissioner that would like to participate in that, it's not Representative Blumenauer himself, but it's his field staff out here. That it probably would make sense for one, and we'll have Commissioner Fox there, that if there's another commissioner that would like to sit in on that, that would be appropriate.
And I'm not voluntolding anyone, but I thought about Tor possibly.
Yes,
because
you
of-
are.
Second the motion.
When is this?
That's Thursday.
This Thursday?
This Thursday from 12:30 to 1:30.
Yeah, I'll come.
You've been on the
Put me
airport
down.
advisory
We'll be-
commission.
put me down.
Or committee.
I'll
and-
come. Yeah,
Okay, you've
sure.
been voluntold.
Yeah, it's fine.
I'm sorry, Tor.
No, it's good.
And you see how this works.
Yeah, it's okay. It's okay. I'm the low guy on the totem pole. I understand. It's fine.
Actually, we should have said Ben, because he's not here.
Yeah.
Well, I was thinking of him too for the EDA on lot 1, but we can't have all three of you there. So.
Excellent. Okay, and then just two more quick items. Columbia Riverkeeper will be conducting a waterfront river cleanup for Saturday, September 30th. On the morning, and the port's going to be helping with.
Is that a volunteer thing? where
It
you can
is.
Come help. Okay.
Yes.
Have you guys messaged that on Facebook and
You know, I don't know if we have our Columbia River Keepers.
Riverkeeper's done the call for volunteers. We always do a thank you on social media to the volunteers. They send us a picture of the crew. We say thank you, but they're recruiting volunteers, so they've done all that.
Okay, but I'm
Yeah.
just asking, have we put out something that says if you'd like to volunteer? I mean, because I think we have a pretty big listserv, right?
Yeah,
For email, if we put something out and say, if you're interested in volunteering for this, contact River
Lori's.
Keepers.
yeah, I'll ask her if she would want that. Our list is almost too big for something like that. Because they would potentially have too much to manage on the response. But I'll ask Lori Epstein if she'd like us to share that.
Okay,
And the port will be assisting with like helping collect some of the garbage and things that get collected out of that. And then just finally, we're putting together a port apparel order. So changing of the season. So if you want any Port of Hood River gear, just let me know and I'll shoot you the link and we'll be submitting that order probably early next week.
Yeah, so what Marcella said. Melissa said she wanted our orders in this by Friday,
By
but
Friday.
I'm sure we can time it so we have everybody's.
Yeah, just let me know in the next 48 hours and we'll get you some gear.
Okay, I gotta ask it. What are we buying?
Well,
T-shirts and-
shirts, like, you know, we have our
Hats.
maintenance staff has Port of Hood River gear. And so if you would like to have get a hat. or
I
a shirt,
don't, but we supply that to our workers.
We do. Yeah.
Is that under labor contract of some kind, or are we just doing it because we're nice?
Well, we're doing it because it's promoting, because it has Port of Hood River
Institutional advertising.
on it, and so it's just helps the public if they want to,
They know who to shoot.
or who to compliment and thank for all their hard work.
Okay.
that's right.
But if you are interested, let me know.
No, I'm being the tightwad in the group. I'm just asking, how much are we spending and why are we doing it?
Yeah, the main reason is to outfit our maintenance crew that they go through a lot of clothing and maintenance, and so it's basically a you know, I guess
Uniform allowance.
it's a uniform, but you know, our employees up at the front will from time to time wear Port of Hood River outfits as well.
And just checking, we're not paying for cleaning of that stuff.
No,
Okay, it's just supply.
correct.
Okay, and what? Once a year?
That seems like about what we do is about once a year.
Okay.
So let me know. Other than that, the only thing that I do think is really important is to get some feedback on the fall planning agenda. You know, I did have lunch with Commissioner Beaker. And I think there was some interest in maybe spending a significant part of the meeting reviewing the mission, the vision, and the goals. You know, so we could clearly very easily pull those out of the strategic business plan. And you guys can bring out the red pins and kind of mark that up and modify those as the port transitions into the next phase post bridge. There continues to be, you know, the need to look at the options for the administrative building relocation. Obviously, we've got the lower mill next steps and obviously coming up with some ideas for financing. We've got the KPFF Lot 1 transportation presentation, which I believe is October 16th.
Yep.
And so that will be a pretty good opportunity to transition into next steps on the waterfront. We could have an ongoing conversation on the PR and communications. Obviously, the mission, vision, goals tie into that. And then finance would also like to just bounce off of you the new fund reorganization now that we've got our new financial contractor on board. And Debbie's got some ideas on that front. So just, you know, we threw that in there. Is there any other feedback that you'd like?
I just got one question. And on page 155, under airport management, and I apologize because I don't remember the date. But Greg, there was an ask, I think, by Ben to get an MOU back to us on the development of the
It's the North End development.
Is it north, yeah,
So-
which includes the new FBO, a restaurant and all that kind of stuff.
That's correct.
When was that supposed to be to us?
There was no date set. We've reached out to outside counsel to help refine. What we did is we took the MOU from the lot 900 and stripped it of anything that was specific to that. Inserted information relative to the North Apron, had a cursory review by Ken Antel. And so then it's going over to their camp to take a look at it to populate. And so there hasn't been a date set.
I
The-
thought
the-
there was a date that Ben talked about, and I think it's now. We need to go back in the notes, but I'm sure it was this month.
Well, I will say that it's very aggressive considering all the negotiations that still need to go back and forth with the MOU. If you think back again to lot 900, that was almost a 3 or 4 month process of negotiating between legal teams, coming up with the terms. And if the MOU is also, is going to include the ground lease and development agreement. So it's much more intricate than I think saying we want it in 2 weeks. I think that would be very difficult, if not impossible to achieve. So I don't recall a date set.
Is that ground lease for development? Have you considered that alternate method that we brought up a while back?
As far as profit sharing or, so that's on the negotiations with their team. And so we're waiting for them to populate the exhibits, come back with. You were here for lot 900, correct? So you remember the process. And so we're waiting for their team to develop their proposals on how they're gonna do it and how they're gonna come back before we go forward with saying, well, we want to consider profit sharing because we haven't even seen their numbers yet to know if profit sharing is even a consideration. And so it's still a little early in the process of the back and forth, to be quite honest, for us to dig our heels in on that as a form of financing it. And plus, staff's thinking about it. It's difficult with the profit sharing. Do we have the overhead to check their P&Ls and their reports?
I'm good. I give up.
I have a strategy question about this MOU for the commissioners to discuss. I've been doing a lot of research. If you go back and look at the way we got the Connect 6 grant and the federal matching money to build the North Ramp. Part of that vision that we presented to get that money was that we would build some sort of emergency readiness center on the North Ramp that firefighting could use and emergency services. That would be like a hangar and then some other space. So I've been doing a whole bunch of research, and there are all kinds of funding sources for grants, like through FEMA and stuff, to build those sorts of things. There's also a state Department of Emergency, what that gets involved in that sort of thing. And I just think that as a port, if we could potentially write the grants and get money to build that kind of a facility, that would be fantastic. I mean, we might even get the county involved because search and rescue services could use it as like an incident command. Firefighting could use it as incident command. And we meet like all the criteria for the FEMA money for vertical construction. So I almost wonder if from a strategy perspective, if you all agree with the idea of whatever contract we come to agree on for the North Ramp, that we leave ourselves the option to carve out a chunk, maybe right next to the fuel tank, that if we decide to pursue something like that, that we could do that. And we wouldn't have our hands tied. We'd be able to do something like that. I'm thinking about how the airport can best serve the community. And that seems like a great idea, especially if we can get it funded through these different routes.
Well, in Department of Defense too, if you put a recruiting center up there. One office. I mean, look at how the Dalles the armory got built. Most of that was, yeah, so the Dalles has a beautiful facility now, and it was largely funded by Department of Defense because they have a very small recruiting center in there.
Interesting.
So, yes, I agree that there are monies out there, and I know that the participants that were talking with
Mhm.
would be open to all of those.
So I guess I just was hoping we could get a consensus that whatever agreement we have, we're not completely signing over the North Ramp, that we reserve the option that if we pursue something like an emergency preparedness center, that we could pursue building that. Or find some way to do that. I'm just worried that if we sign a contract for the development of the North Apron and we just sign over all of our buildable space, then even if we found a way to do that, we wouldn't necessarily be able to do it. And I don't know, my understanding is that if we all think that seems like a reasonable idea, then we can say yay, and then whatever agreement staff develops will have some sort of appendix or something that allows for that possibility.
So the emergency preparedness center, it wouldn't be anything that generated income, it would just be.
So interestingly enough, I'm envisioning it, or I've read about it being done in the following way. You have a hangar, okay, because you might need to use that. Also, you insulate it, and it can also serve as a place to put displaced people. In the case of an earthquake or a fire, something like that, you could actually put people there. Then you have an adjacent or a connected space, which has a bunk room, which has a kitchen, which has bathrooms and showers. So you've got sort of a facility where people could be there if necessary. So that little unit, you could have like a key code entry or something. So sheriff search and rescue or other services could go in and use it. Let's say life flight helicopter lands, somebody needs to use the bathroom urgently. It's right there. But the hangar part could be leased by the port, just with whatever agreement the lease might include something saying that, hey, in the case of an emergency, we're gonna boot your aircraft from the hangar and you'll get a prorated discount. But so we could potentially then lease part of whatever that vertical development is. So I mean,
Or you expand it a little bit.
how so?
I mean, if. The one that I saw wouldn't have taken up the entire North Ramp area. Yeah, maybe there's a configuration modification you could make. To get another bit of hangar in there.
Mhm.
But I think what you're saying makes a lot of sense, that comes back to, I think, the airport commission. To really define. What's our long-term vision of that airport? And if that's piece of it, then we need to allow space for it, or if you look at the airport down here. You know, there's kind of a plan for up in here someplace, but all of this down here. At some point in time, it's gonna have to be redone. So. I'm thinking for the airport commission, think about the whole thing.
Yeah.
And maybe zone things off for various things that you can see in the future that we would really like to have.
Mhm. Okay,
What I like to do is think 5, 10 years out,
no, I'm
15 years out.
Yeah.
And what you're saying is don't landlock yourself in
right,
where you don't have the flexibility.
right. Well, and having something like that right next to the fuel seems like a really good strategic decision. So I don't know if that's something like we need to like make a policy decision on right now. I just want to throw it out there to think about. So,
Yes, Greg.
The way that we've notionally looked at and the way it was presented was a phased approach.
mhm,
So we can certainly include verbiage or as the MOU comes back for consideration in front of the commission. If we need to put more teeth in our ability to utilize that second phase for ourselves
mhm.
as far as developments, we can certainly do that. It's,
Okay.
I don't know that, I mean, just a consensus. I don't know if there's a directive necessary. I mean, that would be up to Kevin to decide if the directive,
You
but
know,
it's
I'm wondering,
opportunities there.
Greg, wasn't there talk about like an quote unquote FBO building being kind of like a last community center building?
Yeah, but I think the scale of that is probably not gonna be effective
Well,
for
but-
a fallout center.
But what I'm wondering, since that's kind of like a you know, that's not really a value generating structure. Could this emergency
married?
operations plan, could it serve in kind of that capacity for
It could.
an FBO?
It could, because I mean, you go to a lot of small airports around the country and. I mean, I don't know that you want to call it an
No, I
FBO,
was
that's a
just-
fixed base operator, but just a building, a facility where. If you land at that airport, you can go in and do flight planning or use a bathroom. Or if you're fatigued, sleep for a few hours so that you're not endangering anyone before you continue.
Right.
So yeah, it certainly could serve multiple purposes.
So
But it could be
that's-
an accoutrement, but if you think of, let's say we have an earthquake and we now have to house 75 to 100 people, then FBO is gonna be significantly too small.
Yeah.
But it could have some of those amenities that are
Right.
necessary. like
That's where-
lockers.
Right, having
Hot
lockers, showers, and then having hangar space where you can put cots.
Exactly, yep.
All right.
Okay.
idea of putting yurts.
There you go.
Yurts on the airport.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I don't mean to derail your executive director.
No, that's,
So-
you know, it's just, this is, why don't, we'll add that
I think this is a
into,
good discussion for fall planning.
absolutely.
Okay,
Okay,
Are there any other ideas or things that you'd like to see? We could. If not, we'll just go ahead and bring that forward to you. And what are you thinking, like maybe is November 7th? I think November 7th was, we were thinking that would be I think the first, that might be the first, yeah. First Tuesday of November.
election. And that's gonna be like, what time?
Man, I mean, in the past, it's been what, 3 or 4 hours?
It's been a half day.
Half day.
I'm not here December the 7th, but go with that.
November.
I'll be in DC.
Oh.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, November
November.
7th.
November 7th.
Well, we
Okay.
kind of want you there, so.
Yeah, I'm
Yeah.
gone Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday.
Thursday.
Fly back Thursday.
So what about the 14th? Or wait, so you're gone? You're gone till Thursday, the 9th?
So the 14th right now is open.
So we could do the 14th, or I mean, it doesn't have to be Tuesday. Could we do it on Thursday, the 2nd, or is? I don't know, Kevin, you tell me.
Well,
Oh,
I'll send out an
And the
email
fire-
that general time of the month. We'll try to find a date that works so
Yeah,
that Commissioner
that
Fox can
week
get
we're
in.
gone.
Okay, cool.
Great.
Thank you.
That is all.
All right,
What day are we doing?
we don't know yet.
We don't know, but I'll send out a survey.
Try to avoid the first week in November because we'll have that 4-day closure that week for the wire ropes project.
Oh, and we don't want to hear about that.
I'll be
We're all in.
delegating that to staff.
Nobody's going in there.
Okay, are there any commissioner or committee reports that anyone has? Yes,
I have
sir.
one. So on the 7th of this month, I went to the Hood River Energy Council. It's very illuminating. It's just a couple of their projects that they've got going on. They're looking for 2 additional council members, because they have seats open. If you have any suggestions on individuals that might be beneficial to sit on that committee, it's a full range of skill sets. And so it was pretty impressive. Their first review is November 15th of their submittal. So there's a little bit of time, but if you have anybody in the community in mind, it doesn't
I'll
have
vote
to
for
be.
Ben.
And.
It doesn't have to be an elected official. Second, it's they're working with the city of Hood River on their emergency management plan and a resilience plan, and it dovetails much into what Tor and I talked about last week as far as there's FEMA money available for developments if you hit the certain metrics of you've got space, yada yada. One of the thing and so what they're doing is they're providing a decision matrix on what existing spaces are best situated for grant projects to upgrade for these things. One other thing to consider when we're talking about possibility of doing something at the airport is solar, because you want to ideally establish a microgrid. So that way you've got your juice and your power already on site. So it's pretty impressive, and I'm excited to see more as that project comes along as far as how it's almost like they're going to do a lot of the work that staff would have to do to go after those FEMA grants as far as laying out what what items need to be in place or what have you. They also talked about their funding. They need 120 for the full-time MCED support staff. They're currently at 111. So if you have any suggestions, they were just reaching out for funding opportunities. They have a couple of energy projects that they updated on. The city of Cascade Locks, their city hall, they're doing a renewable energy grant project through CREP, I'm sorry, to install a microgrid at City Hall, which dovetails again in with FEMA, because FEMA is helping them install a new roof on City Hall and Cascade Locks. Mount Hood Town Hall is doing another CREP funding study to install resilient solar and storage systems, and also working through State Historic Preservation Office, SHPO, on how to navigate it being a historic structure. But so Mount Hood Town Hall is also looking for resiliency projects. And so this it's kind of a hot item. Weiss Middle School, they're doing a microgrid, what is it called? Microgrid Opportunities Vehicles Enhanced Resiliency, MOVER for short, through the New Building Institute. They want to have electric school buses. So not only a microgrid on site for resiliency and such. Apparently, our county is the only county that's really progressive about looking at these microgrids and resiliency. So it's a new thing that is popping up left and right. Yeah, to power their buses and light duty fleet vehicles through power, which the port may want to look at something like that in the future if we, depending on the size of our fleet, if they do establish a microgrid, would there be an opportunity if we're up at the airport or Lower Mill, we have that opportunity looking at grant funding for FEMA up there as well, because who knows, its location is strategic. And the only last thing was kind of interesting is Deep Ridge. They were looking at an inline hydro system to harness energy from the city water system, which is a brilliant idea because you've got the downflow, but apparently there's zero tolerance. If that turbine gives way and starts to free spin, it's going to backlog into the system, and they've got a zero tolerance setup. So that kind of fell apart, but just very creative ways of looking at alternative ways of energy. It was interesting because we've sat and wondered, what does this council do? What's the benefit? And how can it benefit the port? And I think as we're moving into the realization or the reality that we're going to be developing vertical here in the near future, there could be some opportunities to work with them to have them find us some more grant funding and assist. So it's exciting.
I want to just bring it up because I know that the solar field was brought up years and years and years ago, way before your time. And it was my understanding that it was deemed unfeasible because number one, it created a glare for pilots and it was determined to be a danger.
That
So it just might be
whole
good-
study precedes me, but I would defer to the pilot at the table if that's
Yeah.
something that.
I would just look at the history of, because I know that it was looked at before.
Yeah.
And it was deemed
I
not,
think the technology has changed.
I do too, so it could be
The
different.
cost of the materials has come down as well, so that
The
could
other
have
thing,
been.
if you're putting it on top of a building, that's one thing. If you're taking vacant land and.
I think
putting it
before they were
out there,
talking about doing it on vacant land
Yeah.
at the end of the runway and it was deemed not not ideal, but that might just be a good thing to historically revisit.
Will be.
Thank you for that. Any other committee reports
I've got it says commissioner, so.
and or commissioner
I,
report?
I went to the SDAO training last week,
Oh, yeah.
which was very good. So yeah, that's my summary of that. Director Greenwood, I do have a question. Since it says commissioner, I'm going to use that. I'm a commissioner. So do we have a lease on the Hobie Strike hangar at the airport?
Right now, there is a month-to-month standing lease on that building, as I understand it. If you recall, the Port Commission approved a longer-term lease
Mhm.
with
An extension as we navigate the FBO an extension of the deadline as we navigate the FBO and negotiate the FBO agreements.
But the part was the commission approved it, it was never signed by Hood Aero. And so So that, I think that's the point, is that it never got consummated, finished off. And so now it's basically in a month to month.
Has anybody gone back to them and say, please sign?
Well, if I could speak to it,
Yeah,
and
go ahead.
we've talked at length about it. So Hood Arrow was gonna lease it, and they were gonna sublease it to another entity. In exchange for that agreement to allow them to sublease, they were gonna do a series of improvements because the building is just skin and bones. It needs some love.
Oh, I know.
Yeah, and so the lease rate that was assumed, once you go into some of the other alternatives and it's not insulated, it doesn't have a restroom, it doesn't have a kitchenette, it's less valuable as far as a lease rate. And so through that process of that option falling apart, because basically their subleasee was scooped out by another entity, and so they're no longer available. The pitch from the FBO is we would like to use it as a community storage center. So we'll pitch it, we'll advertise it as something that could be a temporary storage for people coming in, transient aircraft. And they'd be able to use it overnight or for a few nights, and as it's available, that's what we would like to use it for. And so negotiating that and also navigating what does that mean as far as seeing your reporting on how often you're using it? How are you advertising it? What are your price structures? What are these things? And so
I'm just seeing an agreement that has kind of devolved into kind of a mess of various negotiations and this and that. And then we as a port don't have a lease. Why don't we just, and I keep having people approach me about hangars and hangar space, and I kind of feel like, why can't we just put it out as like an auction, like a silent auction type thing? Hey, if you want to have a 3-year lease, you tell us what you'd pay per month. And if you win the silent auction, boom, you've got a 3-year lease and a contract. Get that sucker rented for what it can go for instead of what we're currently getting for it.
okay, just to add again, it is currently in the FBO extension, so it's
Okay.
not just floating around.
Okay.
That's what we're talking about, but they are still willing to do improvements to the building at no cost to the port, like fix the doors, fix some of the exterior siding. So
This
if we
is
put it out-
all kind of being negotiated. It's not, when is there gonna be a proposal, I guess?
we have a deadline is when we have to get this agreements
Yeah,
dialed in. These are nuances that are not normal. So it's not a straightforward standard agreement that as required. Utilizing legal on how can we do this? How can we make sure we protect ourselves?
What's the deadline?
I don't have it off the top of my head. I want to say we have another month and a half before it's
Okay.
a done deal. My worry about putting it out to round robin or everybody put your
Mhm.
is that we'll be stuck with something that it will get less than what we're expecting to get, and we'll have to continually put the improvements and the capital
Sure.
costs into
Sure.
to making sure it stays up and
Yeah.
it's dry. And so, for a 2-year agreement, it seemed like, hey, this is a good option because the building is going to improve in the next 2 years.
Okay.
And it's going to be operating, it's going to provide a function for the community, not necessarily the locals who want to store their aircraft undercover.
Yeah.
But this is a community-based service perceivably of transient aircraft storage when people come through.
But we would put the criteria on there that it's gotta be airplane related. They can't bring in. a harbor
Yeah,
service
that's a
part.
given, that's a given. FAA assurances require that. But if we can't land on something, then by all means,
Okay.
I don't see any reason why we shouldn't.
Okay.
But it's just been going in that direction as far as this is an opportunity to provide more storage for a wider swath of people rather than
Mhm.
3 people that have enough money to rent it and can fit their planes.
Okay, great. I just want to have a roadmap. Feel like.
Should we, because there will be an FBO representative, do you want to bring this up at our AAC meeting on Thursday as a topic of discussion?
Potentially.
Okay.
I'll think about what angle might be relevant for that meeting, but yeah. So, thank you.
Okay, any other committee reports, commissioner reports? If not, we can move on to action items. Greg, you're back up again.
All right, so as Kevin alluded to with the market study for the Lower Mill, this was a directive from fall planning to get lot 902 completed. As you read in the memo, this is a project that's largely through COVID when everything stopped, but our permit timeframe did not stop when we were able to get back to it and get an estimate to do the project. We had less than half of the money budgeted that the engineer's estimate came back to. So we only had 1 year left in the permit. We had to get at least the portion that allowed us to close out the permit done. Port facility staff, they performed the work last year, did as much as they could before the rain set in. We went out to bid for the final aspect because we don't have the equipment, and these guys, they did a great job, but they don't have the finesse skill set. So we budgeted in this year $250,000 for this project. We went out to bid and we received a bid under what we budgeted. And so that's what you have in front of you is the contract with James Dean Construction to do the work to complete lot 902, and then it will be Commissioner Chapman considered shovel ready.
Right. And they can get it done before all the asphalt plants close for the fall?
There's no asphalt there. Essentially, the project is going into where the old wetland was, the ravine. They're
Oh,
gonna take
okay.
that out, put geotextile, engineered fill, and then roll over that and then grade the entire site.
Gotcha,
So
okay.
yeah, there won't be
No
any
asphalt, okay.
pavement to support a project because we don't have a program yet. So it's
Okay.
just getting it ready to develop.
Okay. Anyone have any questions for Greg about this?
You know, I was probably one of the bigger pushers to get this thing done. I now have a question based on the study that we just went through. We've met the intent of the permit's closing, right? Is this the wisest use of money right now? Where it's the lowest payback, lowest worthy area to be developed? Would it be better for us to put that $250,000 into a fund to go do 1015? And leave it like it is for a couple of years, or as an option, if we decide we want to put an RV park out there, make that part of the contract to prepare and pour the pads and run the undergrounds at the same time as one contract. You may get some efficiencies of cost if you did it that way. So I'm just internally questioning, for $250,000, where should we be spending that money to get a return generated as quick as we can? It doesn't seem like that lot is the best use of that fund right now, as long as we've met the permit.
That's an astute point. I would bring up that there's still a low-lying area, and as the rains come, if water sits, the DEQ could come back and redistinguish that as a wetland. So we
Is
need
it a
to raise.
relatively small area?
But no, it's almost just about half of the site, if you will. And so there is a ravine there, and if water sits there, DEQ could easily come back and say, well, it's a wetland now, and we have to go through the process again. But I do agree, looking at the results and what 902 could be, I don't know that there would be, when you think of an RV park, if we can get it in the short term, it would be that cost prohibitive to go back and, because you're just trenching out and running utilities at that time. But what this will do is it will get it ready so that way you can envision that, you can do some site planning, the different piles of material that are out there. Some is valuable, some usable for the project, some is not. I think that's a commission decision, but the wetland gives cause for concern, or the previous wetland area gives cause for concern that it could be recommissioned as a wetland. If we don't fill it in with something, if we just fill it in with dirt, if we do sell it to somebody, if we decide that it's not something we want to keep on our books, they're going to want to see the engineering report that those site improvements are capable of certain density tests.
So the permit that we opened, or that was open and we've closed, is that particular area right there? So we put some kind of a drainage in there and rock and whatnot in there.
This has just been mucked out. What happened was the facilities guys rerouted via what I think it's a 12-inch clean outs at the corners, and we've got a ditch inlet on the far end, culvert through, and it runs out that way instead of going to the ditch inlet now. So we've rerouted the water that's coming from across the road, because what happens is it comes along here, goes under the highway here, and then pops out. That water is contained, but when you think about water that falls from the sky or the snow melts, if it's got nowhere to go, if it's not sheeting that way, it's just going to sit. And if it sits for any period of time, vegetation starts to come back. The DEQ is going to start to look at that as not necessarily complete. We've completed the work to close it out, but we haven't completed it to keep us from not being liable if it turns into a wetland again.
Okay, so. And I know we're working this and we shouldn't be. But if we're trying to save some money, 250,000 is 250,000. If all we're trying to do is mound around that area. So it doesn't tend to collect. Have you thought, can you think about just doing that one area? Making it, filling it in, making it a little higher, so it's not the low point on the plot.
So that's the.
And could we do that for a lot less than $250,000?
I want to say, even if you look through the bid tab, if you look at what the cost, the larger costs are, it's the material. So when you think about filling in that lowland area, it's your engineered fill. The grading component, the final grade, what, under $4,000. So that's not the large portion of the project. It's the geotextile and it's the engineered fill in the low-lying area.
I'm surprised we have to put that down if we've already closed the permit out.
It's just to protect us so the wetland doesn't come back.
Yeah, and this is, I mean, I've taken those engineering, civil engineering.
So quick question, the $250,000 that's been budgeted, that's just out of the bucket, it's not a grant.
That's correct.
Okay, right. And then just a comment was our presenter was talking about how that lot in particular, because of its road frontage, has the potential in the future to be very valuable to developer because of its location. So even though, I mean, the way that they presented it, and that was my irritation, I guess, about the way they presented it, is all of their numbers on return on this lot, return on that lot is based on their arbitrary way that they decided to build on the lot.
Right.
They could have built a bigger building on that lot, and all of a sudden that would have been perceived as the valuable lot.
Yes, but you got to consider what the early findings was, that similar to the parcel in Cascade, the development Cascade lots.
Mm-hmm.
The strategy is not to build
To build a
the
big,
whale,
big
because you might
yeah.
be sitting with a whale.
I get
Now,
it.
granted, if we build it, they may come, and
Yeah,
maybe
yeah.
will be valuable, but not having them run models, especially because once you get to a larger scale, your construction types change.
Yes.
Instead of metal, you're talking about tilts of concrete,
Yes.
and it gets significant.
I just wanted to draw the attention to the point that lot could potentially be more valuable than we might perceive it to be based on the results of that.
Yeah, and one thing that I wasn't gonna bring it up in their presentation, but we can have a lot line adjustment and develop part of it. And those numbers, because they were saying that, these three, and a lot of it is circulation with trucks, and you have 180 feet turning radius. And so McKenzie was their subcontractor. They worked a couple different ways, but this used to be a separate lot. It became together or conjoined. We have another access here. We certainly could have a lot line adjustment, and then if the numbers will become, because if you look at the footage of coverage versus the real market land or real land value, there's ways that we could get creative, and even if it's partial for said RV and part of the time. And there's fall planning conversation for sure, but
I'll back off in your judgment that by not spending $250,000, we have a high risk of having to open that back up. Then it's probably worth doing the $250,000. But if you look at just the overall economics, that's probably not where you want to be spending.
I agree. After that presentation, it without some of the nuance to it, but our engineer was adamant that you gotta get out there as soon as you can and fill in that low-lying area, because if it starts to hold water again, then we're back to where we were in the first place.
Any other questions?
Up the time.
That's okay. Any other questions? Any other discussion? If not, can I get a motion?
I move that we approve the contract with James Dean Construction for Lower Mill Wetland Mitigation Site Grading Project.
Second.
Any discussion? If not, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye, passes. Okay, and now we have a real commission call, but I guess we kind of already did that. Any directives to staff?
So I recorded a few. Did you get some, Daryl?
And I have the directives for staff to implement an internal process for going to legal and to ask concise questions. when they do.
Okay.
We have a request to check on the deadline for the FBO negotiation for, and also for the Hobie Strike hangar discussion. And we have an idea to research available grant funding for development of an emergency readiness center at the airport. And a request to tentatively schedule the Port's Fall Planning meeting for November 14th.
Okay. I think that's
A
good.
question on that one, Christie.
Yeah.
Generally, we do fall planning with a quick business meeting right after. Do you want to keep the third Tuesday for the regular session and do fall planning separately? And have 2 meetings in November?
Bill, is it the third Tuesday Thanksgiving
It's
week?
their Thanksgiving week.
Oh, yeah,
So
then
you can
let's do
make
that.
November 14th be
Mhm.
our only meeting and just have our, as we've done in the past, you have your 4 hours of fall planning and then you adjourn and go into a quick business meeting. We try
Yeah.
to keep it simple for you.
Yeah, that sounds fun. 4 hours. Yeah. Okay. If nobody else has anything else, then I will recess our regular session. And I will enter into executive session under ORS 192.6602E for real property transactions.